So jumping back over to the JP version of the game, we have Nemo going on raid up with Francis Drake. And if there's one servant you gotta summon for on this banner, I definitely think it's Nemo. I understand Drake is very solid AoE rider. Don't have too many complaints about her. I think she's just very generally solid. But Nemo, this dude is absolutely a beast of a servant. And he's basically just here to do massive Unga Zunga amounts of damage. Like, he hits really hard as long as you can fulfill certain conditions. But even outside of all of those conditions, he still does very decent damage, and we'll talk about that in today's video. But if you enjoy FGO content, I upload these videos every single day, and all I ask for in return is a like on the video and a subscribe to the channel. But if you're feeling extra feisty and you really like what I do, consider clicking that join button to become a channel member. But on that note, let's go ahead and start off by talking about Nemo's hits, which are honestly a little deceptive. You look at his hits, and you wouldn't think this is like a super broken servant, right? Who cares about the quick card, 8.9% star gen with 3 hits? I mean, if you're clicking that quick card, you are kind of a fool. Although, do keep in mind, it does have an 11% passive buff from, well, his passive. But other than that, he is an art servant, so the main thing you want to point out here are those arts cards, which you'll notice they're pretty decent. They have 59% NP charge per attack with 4 hits on 2 of those arts cards, right? So, not bad. It definitely does average out to being pretty good. The reason I think they are that solid is that, as we'll get into, Nemo has the potential to have like massive arts buffs, but it's on specific battlefields. So they had to make his arts cards good to stand on their own with the initial buff, but not too broken to where when he's getting those special buffs, that then he already had stupid broken arts cards on top of that. So they didn't want to make him too broken, but he had to still be good outside of special battlefield. Unfortunately, they did do my boy a little dirty here because they gave him the 4 hits on the extra attack, which is not the 5 that we like to see around here. If you didn't know, the extra attack is a composite card. It gens stars, gens NP, does massive damage, and just generally rounds out your Brave Chains, especially for DPS servants, because you're getting that extra bit of damage, genning your NP especially. And if you're a star gen servant or you just have very high hits on your extra attack, it can give you that little bit of extra stars in a Brave Chain. 4 is what I would consider average. I like to see it higher than 4, but 4 is fine generally, but 5 is my gold star, right? That's the gold standard I like to see. But enough about his hits. Let's go ahead and start talking about his skills, because this is where this dude starts to get very interesting. So up first, we have basically his charisma skill. He's giving the entire party 12% NP damage, 12% attack, both for 1 turn, but if you're on a water side or void space battlefield, he's further increasing the entire party's attack by 20% for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown. So it's almost like his charisma, the 20% attack buff that lasts for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown, that gold standard for what a charisma should be that we all know and love, that is locked behind specific battlefields. Now, void space, aside from that one event, I don't believe we've really seen at all. But Waterside is actually rather common. But they at least gave him little buffs to that charisma, because then he's giving an additional attack and NP damage buff for that turn. And you'll notice this is why Nemo can hit really hard, because he just is riddled with different ways to buff his attack. But we'll talk about that more as we get to the conclusion of this video. His second skill is, I would say, his utility skill, because it's giving him a guts that lasts for 5 turns, which is not common. That is very rare for us to get a guts that lasts that long. Usually they're on a 3-turn cooldown. But the fact that this lasts for 5 turns on a skill with a 7-turn cooldown means that you'll only be 2 turns without having this guts up. So for the most part, he should be relatively safe enough. It also comes with an immediate 30% battery, which is obviously very good, but then if that guts ever procs, he gets an additional 50% NP gauge. So he has a big battery if things get tough, but then an immediate smaller battery, which, considering he is a single target servant that does really big damage, you are going to be bringing him to very hard content to be like the boss killer, which means he probably will get his guts procced at some point throughout the fight, and that means you get a free 50% battery, which he's going to want because the whole name of the game is chunk people with that huge NP damage. So again, skill 2, very, very phenomenally built. Then we have his third skill, which is going to give the entire party a 20% arts buff for 3 turns, and then it drops 15 stars. Now, if you're on a void space or waterside battlefield, you get an additional 20% arts buff to the entire party, meaning on those battlefields, he's giving a 40% arts buff to the entire party for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown. That is 10% shy of giving the entire party an arts mana burst for 3 turns. It is really, really, really strong. It not only means that he's going to be hitting hard and buffing up his NP gain through his arts cards, but he's doing that for the entire party. On top of just providing a little bit of extra stars, which I do appreciate seeing in an art servant, because art servants are not known for being star genners, right? Because the arts card, if you didn't know, has a 0 value for genning stars, just as buster cards have a 0 value for genning NP. Obviously, you can get arts cards to gen stars, and you can get buster cards to gen NP, but you have to put in a lot of work for those to actually do the thing they're not intended to do, right? So the fact that he provides just a free 15 stars for the entire party to use. So when you go back and look at his skills, you see 1 and 3 are very good because they're buffing up Nemo's damage to like an absurd degree. And then they're also providing a lot for the entire party. Especially if they're an art servant, they get so much for him just being on the field. And keep in mind, this helps out your supports as well. Let's say you're using double Castoria. Castoria does appreciate this because it buffs the NP gain of her arts cards with this massive arts buff, so it means she can get to her NP faster, which everybody wants. So even if you're using non-damaging servants with Nemo, as long as they have an arts NP or they have decent arts cards, they can make use of that. And then you have his second skill, which gives him pretty decent survivability and a guts. It actually pairs rather well with Castoria because Castoria, the main arts support servant, is already giving him invincibility and then solemn defense, so then guts is like the only thing he lacks. So I really do like that design, and then giving him 2 separate ways to get a pretty decent battery is also very good. I would also like to mention his passives. I already mentioned riding when talking about his quick card, but he does have an innate built-in 10% crit damage in his arts cards, as well as getting just permanent 500 DR when he's on that waterside or void space battlefield. So he'll just be a little bit more tanky, which again adds to his survivability if you have him on those specific battlefields. But then let's go ahead and talk about that NP, because his NP is kind of nuts. So again, if you're on those specific battlefields, he's going to be getting an additional 20% NP damage, and he's going to be piercing evasion, which is very nice. And then his overcharge is further increasing his NP damage by 10 to 30%, again, depending on overcharge level. And then if he wasn't already doing enough, they gave him a 150% extra damage mod against super large enemies. Which outside of a select few servants, this is like the dragons, the spriggans, big ghosts, the boars, the onis, all of those like mid-boss enemies, or even just some enemies you fight in random nodes like the giants or whatever. Those are all super large enemies that he gets massive damage against. Unfortunately, it doesn't say that it lasts the entire turn, so you're only getting that on the NP. You can't do like massive, super crazy brave chains, because if you'll notice the wording, like the NP damage and the pierce evasion, those say they last for 1 turn, but the actual damage against the super large enemies does not say it lasts the entire turn. So unfortunately, you just get to chuck your enemy for a massive amount of damage, but then you got to use measly face cards to, you know, follow up on the attack if they're still alive. But is Nemo good? Yeah, Nemo's absolutely crazy. Even if you just look at his damage without any of his crazy buffs or anything, he's very high up there when it comes to how much damage he does. Like, he's in like the top 5, I believe, for single target riders. He's really high up there. But then once we start adding, you know, waterside battlefield and then attacking a super large enemy, he becomes one of, if not the most damaging servant in the entire game. Like, if you look at his calcs, it's insanely high how much damage this guy can do. And the fact that he's even in contention up there for being the most damaging servant in the game with his NP is just absolutely ludicrous. Granted, the conditions are a bit harder than, say, someone like Enkidu or Musashi, where Musashi just wants to be fighting an alter ego servant and Enkidu just wants to be fighting a threat against humanity. For Nemo, you do need both the battlefield and you do need to be fighting a super large enemy, but still, I think it's absolutely crazy that even without those, he can still contend with the other big boy single target riders, and that is all just a nice cherry on top. So should you summon for Nemo? I mean, dude, if you have Castoria and you're looking for a really strong single target rider, then be my guest. Go ahead and summon for this guy. I cannot recommend him enough. He's really, really good. Because as far as single target riders go that are also arts, you really don't have a lot of options. Because you have Murasaki, but she only comes out for summer, so if you don't have her, you don't have her. There's Ryoma, who's free to play, but again, if you haven't been around since that event has been out, then you don't have Ryoma. Mandricardo and George are both pretty solid, but I don't think you're using George as your main single target DPS. And people, for whatever reason, have a vendetta against Mandricardo. Like, you either really like him or you don't like him at all. Again, I think he's very solid. I think you could definitely get away with just using Mandricardo. Like, you don't need, quote-unquote, to summon for Nemo, but it's definitely a step up if you pull out Nemo, because that dude just chunks his enemies away and just blows them to Kingdom Come. Because keep in mind as well, you don't just have to use him to fight casters or berserkers. If you have like a super large enemy, like say a dragon that's a saber or something, you can bring him to that fight and he'll chunk that enemy because he's getting such a massive damage mod against them. But I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts in the comments down below. Let me know what you guys think about Nemo. This has definitely been a servant that I've come around to a lot, because when he first came out, I didn't think he was the best, but then after checking him out again, I'm like, actually no, this guy is really, really strong. He's very solid. I just want to warn you guys that if you do choose to summon on this banner, you are forfeiting the ability to summon on the Summer 6 gacha, which, if the alleged leaks are true, the potential servants are a little hype. Like, I know people will be kind of excited about them, but I don't know if I trust these leaks. That's why I'm not going to, like, put it out there or anything, because I don't want people to be like, oh my goodness, this servant's going to be there, and then it's like Summer Julius Caesar or something, right? It's just something from complete left field, and then everyone's just super disappointed. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Let me know what you guys are thinking. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace late, guys.